In our first story, Behind Mansion Walls.
They're looking for a 7-foot-tall, barefoot ninja.
Killers in the shadows create panic in Beverly Hills.
It was just mind-blowing.
And later, a gunfight in a mansion on Sunset Boulevard.
You're always asking for money.
He liked to hit men, he liked to hit women, and he liked to hit children.
I just had the feeling that what everybody was telling me was not the truth.
I'm Christopher Mason. Los Angeles may be the city of angels, but behind mansion walls, some of its children seem to have the devil in them. When these Beverly Hills kids hear the word no, they reach for their guns.
Los Angeles, September 25th, 1985. All is quiet in the exclusive neighborhoods of Beverly Hills, Bel Air, and Brentwood. It's just before 9 p.m., and most people are sitting in front of their TV sets.
In 1985, no one could afford to miss an episode of TV's #1 show, Dynasty. While LA's wealthy elite take guilty pleasure watching tales of other people's wealth and excess, the real drama is unfolding on their doorstep.
The weapon used was a .357 Magnum, which is a very powerful revolver. The shots had to sound like cannons going off.
One of the neighbors heard the shots.
In Brentwood, a UCLA basketball star hears gunfire. He can't believe what he sees. 2 masked ninjas fleeing into the night. And that's not all.
He had rushed downstairs, jumped down into the garage, and ran to the scene where the 2 bodies were still, basically, just still bleeding, in just a few seconds after they'd been shot. He was the only one who saw anything.
His millionaire neighbors, Jerry and Vera Woodman, have been gunned down in their own garage. Shot 6 times at close range.
The male received 2 gunshots. The female victim has been shot in the upper torso area, frontal, a number of times.
The Woodmans had been at a family dinner, marking the end of the Jewish holiday Yom Kippur.
I got a call in the middle of the night. It was amazingly shocking at the time. It was just mind-blowing that this had come down the way it had.
Dr. Robert Carnes is Vera Woodman's brother-in-law. He's also their family doctor, caring for the Woodmans and their 5 children for 30 years.
Jerry was very special to me. There was one time my folks were having some financial problems, and they were out here talking about it in general. Jerry took my mother aside and signed a check and handed it to her and said, "Make it whatever you want, and don't worry about paying me back." Well, they didn't need that kind of money, but he was that kind of person.
Jerry arrived in America in 1937, a penniless British immigrant. By the 50s, he's made a fortune.
Jerry Woodman is living proof that America is indeed the land of opportunity. When the demand for television sweeps the US after the Second World War, Jerry knows exactly what the country needs: antennas.
Selling TV antennas makes Jerry a wealthy man. But his appetite for profit is legendary. He wants more.
It was said about Gerald Woodman that he could start a business in a phone booth with $5 and change.
He sniffs out a new opportunity: plastic. Woodman's company becomes a money-making machine.
They had $1 million house up in Bel Air when $1 million was a lot of house. It'd be like a $20 million house now. His wife had maybe $10 million worth of jewelry and furs, mostly jewelry, mostly diamonds.
I must say I'm pleased with the way you guys...
Of their 5 children, 2 sons, Neil and Stuart, are groomed to join Jerry in the family company.
They were very spoiled. They got Mustangs and Corvettes for their respective birthdays. They got an awful lot of toys.
I'm just saying I would have done it differently. Well,
I would say that they got from their father a love of money and a obsession with money.
Jerry is tough and ruthless in business. His sons Neil and Stuart learn to be the same. Did their callous business dealings spawn an act of vengeance?
Vera had a small fortune in diamonds on her person. She had a purse that had several $1,000s in cash in it. Gerald had a roll of bills in his pocket and his wallet, his credit cards. None of it was taken.
Given the violence of the murder and the MO of the murder and how the murders occurred, it was pretty evident that this was a hit as opposed to a robbery.
What inspires such violent retribution? What the crime scene doesn't reveal is Jerry Woodman's secret life. Sure, he's a risk taker and an absolute whiz at business, but he's also a shameless embezzler.
Gerald was a master thief at stealing from his own companies and concealing the proceeds. He'd been doing this for 40 years in every way imaginable.
He steals around $2 million a year. When sons Stuart and Neil join the company, Jerry promises them half to keep quiet.
They and their father had for 30 years ran a criminal enterprise. They had stolen from their own company in every imaginable way, and no one had ever come near catching them. Gerald had figured out a way not to pay any taxes on his money. He had figured out a multitude of scams to skim money off the top of his business.
Jerry spends his ill-gotten gains on a life of passionate extremes. At the track, he loses thousands on a single bet. On a ball game, he'll happily gamble up to $100,000.
He was passionate about gambling, he was passionate about drinking, he was passionate about making money, he was passionate about having mistresses, and yet almost all the people who knew him socially loved him. He was a very charming rogue of a fellow.
Charming or not, Jerry has stepped on plenty of toes over the years.
It was very possible, at least in the initial thinking, that he had owed somebody some money and not paid him, or that he had maybe seduced the wrong man's wife.
But why ninja assassins?
There were human barefoot footprints going from the crime scene and back.
And when they measured the stride, they looked like they belonged to a 7-foot man. So they put out the first all-points bulletin was looking for 2 7 feet tall, barefoot ninjas.
This is big news. A few months earlier, actress Penny Marshall was robbed by 2 men dressed as ninjas. That robbery sent a shock through Hollywood.
It turns out that the suspect in the Penny Marshall case had been convicted, had gone to prison, and was out, and was in fact probably within a half a mile of the crime scene.
If ninja assassins are responsible, who paid the bill? The Woodman's daughter has a theory.
And she ran up to Jack Holder in the street after having been told already by the phone that their parents had been killed, and said, "I know who did this. My brothers did this."
when the lady out of the blue who we'd met 5 minutes ago says Stuart and Neil were involved, okay, we're interested, but you know, you have to give us more than that.
The Woodman murder investigation has barely begun. With no hesitation, their daughter tells police that her brothers must have done it. The detectives wonder, just what sort of family is this?
It's time for us to expand. Yeah.
Well, the two sons had a sort of love-hate relationship with their father. On one hand, they both worshipped him. They thought that he was the smartest man who ever lived.
We are thinking of going interstate. No, what are you talking about?
On the other hand, he was a guy who did not suffer fools gladly. He would yell and scream and even take a swat or two at his kids or even at his wife. So they both feared him and loved him all at the same time.
The lessons from their father would come back to haunt him. When Jerry has a heart attack, the boys pounce on their weakened patriarch.
We don't need you, Dad.
Dad, you okay?
So the boys went to their mother and they said, look, Mom, Dad has worked hard his whole life. And now he's had a heart attack and he needs to recuperate. Why doesn't he just retire?
But Gerald Woodman knows his sons all too well. They want the business and its profits for themselves.
They went to court, there was a lawsuit, he lost, and they wound up with the company.
A mother and father ousted from the business they built up by their own flesh and blood.
He lost his house. Vera lost a lot of her jewels. And they moved into this condominium apartment in Brentwood, which was maybe a third of the size of the house that they'd had.
Bankrupt, he and Vera have their lives downgraded from obscenely rich to merely wealthy. Gone are the mansion walls and the manicured gardens. They settle for a measly condo in Brentwood. Is that enough humiliation to satisfy their sons, Neil and Stuart? Or do they want more?
On the night of the murder, Stuart and Neil Woodman are miles away.
They both had very solid alibis in that each of them entertained a break-the-fast dinner in their own homes many miles away in front of many witnesses.
If they are somehow involved, why kill both parents? Why not just the powerful patriarch, Jerry?
They could have killed Jerry at any time. Jerry would take his dog and walk it every night at 6 p.m.
Piece of cake, just drive up there and kill him. But Vera very rarely went out of the house.
It's a pile of mail over
The answer is on a piece of paper sitting in their apartment.
Hey, insurance policy.
The wealthiest residents of Los Angeles do their best to keep their grand mansions safe from the outside world. Gates, alarms, security guards.
But in September 1985, every millionaire from Beverly Hills to Brentwood is pacing around their pool wondering, just how do I protect myself from a team of ninjas?
These fleet-footed masked men are being blamed for the murders of Gerald and Vera Woodman. The crime's only witness saw ninjas fleeing from the scene. But the search for a motive brings detectives back to the Woodman family.
It was just a lot of little things and big things that just built up, and a lot of hatred.
There's plenty out there waiting for us.
Woodman family members have no qualms naming two suspects: the brothers, Neil and Stuart. The boys have airtight alibis, but they have waged a bitter legal battle with their father to take control of his company. And searching through the family papers, detectives uncover a damning document.
Hey, insurance policy.
The life insurance settlement on their mother, not their father, but their mother, was $500,000.
Payable to the family company, now owned and run by Neil and Stewart.
Neil and Stewart immediately took half of it each. Neil bought a new car, Stewart bought a new car, and then Stewart spent $50,000 on his son's bar mitzvah.
A handy windfall, indeed, but not enough evidence to mount a trial for murder. One phone call will change all that.
We received a telephone call from a retired Los Angeles policeman saying that he thought he had some information relating to our case with the murder of the two Woodmans.
He remembered meeting one of the sons, Neil. He remembered that Neil was with a guy named Steve Hommick, who he had hired to do security.
2 days before the murder, Steve Hommick flies into LA from Las Vegas. His brother Robert lives just a mile from where Jerry and Vera are killed.
Steve's brother was seen parked in a vehicle about 2 houses away a short time before the murders. We knew that Steve and his brother were very tight and that the brother lived within a mile of the Woodman residence. We now had a connection between the Woodmans and the Hommicks.
So this became a thread. And as they pull on this thread, the whole crime began to unravel.
Police trace a phone call from Steve Hommick's brother to Stewart Woodman, just 2 days before the murder.
All of these things that put together in a package, oh, it had to be them.
Another man traveled with Steve Hommick from Vegas, Mike Dominguez. Police arrest him for a parole violation, and they meet a man who is ready to talk.
He was told that we had a case against him, and if he wanted to live, then it was in his best interest to talk to us.
Mike was dumb as dirt, as the cops put it. And he starts reeling off a list of crimes that Hommick was involved in. And this is what implicated the two sons.
He gave us the entire case. He took us on the route they took. He told us about setting the thing up, everything.
And the job for Dominguez? He's paid $5,000 to sit at a bus stop and radio in when the Woodmans drive past.
They got a radio message that Gerald was approaching. This came from Mike Dominguez, who was on a bus bench about a mile away.
They're coming your way. Over, out, it's them.
And they were waiting in an alley behind the house. They walked down past 5 or 6 windows. No one saw them. They walked through a soft earth of a planter. They cut the chain. They opened a steel gate. They let themselves down into the parking garage, and they took up positions on either side of Gerald's parking spot.
Jerry and Vera Woodman innocently believe they are driving into the safety of their garage, not a trap.
As soon as Gerald opened the door, Steve Hommick walked up and shot Vera through the open door. They fired a few times until they were sure they were dead.
The killers take off fast.
They ran out the way they came in. They jumped over the cinder block fence. And they had pulled the hoodies up over their hair to conceal their hair from view.
Not ninjas at all, just hitmen in black hoodies. One more piece of evidence helps clinch the case. A chain had been cut so the killers could break into the Woodman's garage.
Nothing in here. Yeah, but nothing
And
either.
at Steve Hummock's brother's home.
Bolt cutters.
We found a set of bolt cutters.
And the striations on these bolt cutters matched the severed link on the chain that was used to gain access to the underground parking.
In LA and Vegas, simultaneous arrests round up the whole gang, including Stewart and Neil Woodman. Family and friends are shocked, but not surprised.
Many nights, I would just run this over in my head again and again and again, and even till the very end, I was holding out that that wasn't the case, that this was a random killing of some strange type.
I think that they just felt betrayed by their father, and their hatred for him grew to the point where they knew that as long as he was alive, he was never going to leave them alone.
I mean, this was months of intrigue and lawsuits, and I can't understand how someplace along the line, reality didn't kick in. Somebody didn't say, what in the world are we doing? But it didn't.
Stewart Woodman is convicted of murder. The idea of death row gives him pause for thought. He's already betrayed his parents. Now he turns against his brother.
He called his attorney and said, I want to make a deal. Yeah, we did it, but I don't want to go to the gas chamber. And he told the investigators the whole story.
Stewart and Neil Woodman are found guilty of ordering the murder of their own parents. Both are serving life sentences with no parole. Their ragtag crew of not-quite ninjas fares little better.
Steve Hummock received the death penalty in California and Las Vegas. The rest of the people involved were all sentenced to life.
To this day, Neil Woodman denies involvement in the murder. He blames it all on his brother Stewart.
I do think there was something wrong with them psychologically. I think they were both quite warped. I think they both had a very large sense of entitlement. I think that they were both arrogant. They had very little empathy for other people. I think they were sociopaths in one form or another. They were incredibly arrogant. They and their father had, for 30 years, ran a criminal enterprise. They had stolen from their own company in every imaginable way, and no one had ever come near catching them. I think they felt that they could get away with anything.
Coming up, behind mansion walls, a Hollywood dream
He was known to have dated Hollywood movie stars.
turns to Hollywood nightmare on Sunset Boulevard.
Mr. Kyle wound up getting off between 5 and 6 shots from his revolver before he died.
There's Hollywood, there's Sunset Boulevard, and there's Bel Air, Tinseltown's pinnacle address. To live here, you need millions. You might be a movie star, a hit music producer, or a studio executive. Chances are you won't be a gunslinger. So on the night of July 22nd, 1983, when shots rang out from a grand mansion, everyone stops.
It sounds like a scene from a Hollywood Western, and in many ways, it is. The victim is a 6'4" Texan multimillionaire, Henry Kyle. When he turns 60, he moves from Dallas to Hollywood to make movies and chase pretty women. But this tall Texan is riding for a fall.
Henry Kyle has already amassed a fortune from real estate and restaurants. He moves to Hollywood to run his newly acquired film production company.
I don't think he was passionate about cinema. It was a means to make money. And he liked being around beautiful people and beautiful girls. And this was the perfect place for Henry to be if you wanted to chase the ladies, and that's Hollywood.
And Henry catches some ladies, too, dating stars like Zsa Zsa Gabor and marrying 5 times. He buys a lavish mansion overlooking Sunset Boulevard.
When he was in California, he liked to become the Texan that was flashing dollars around, and that he liked to then come to Texas and present the image of the Hollywood movie mogul. So, you know, he was a bright guy. He knew how to push people's buttons, so to speak.
But Henry pushes some buttons too hard.
And there's a coffee. It's the student.
He was violent in his personal dealings and his business dealings. He was explosive, and he could become violent in a basketball game or violent in a tennis match, and he could frighten people. So that is, in a nutshell, Henry Kyle.
Doesn't matter. No.
I mean, he's a retired Marine colonel. He's a combat veteran. He's a tough old guy.
I want them to do it now or they're fired.
You know, he did it his way, and if you didn't like it, that was tough luck.
Okay, I understand.
But the tough-talking Texan runs out of luck in July 1983.
When I arrived at the residence, I found Henry Kyle. He was laying face down in the dining room area. He was obviously dead. There was a .357 revolver laying next to his right hand.
LAPD detective Bob Grogan knows Hollywood well. He was a consultant on the hit cop show T.J. Hooker. And like a scene from so many TV thrillers, he combs the scene for evidence.
He had sustained an obvious gunshot wound to the upper left back area. And I noted right away in that there was evidence of tattooing. Tattooing is unburned gunshot residue. I felt that this was pretty much a gunshot wound that was inflicted from a distance of less than a foot.
Yeah, this is it. So we came down and
Detective Grogan has an early lead, a witness. Henry Kyle's 20-year-old son, Ricky. He tells police that at 3:45 a.m., an intruder broke into the house, waking his father.
His father has got his gun in his hand and tells him he hears a burglar. That his father goes to the dining room area. Hears a noise, turns around to his left behind him, and fires his gun. Ricky then says,
and all of a sudden he's just like bang, bang, bang.
a man then fired several shots, hitting his father.
You know, I felt his presence.
I said, did you see him? He said, no, I felt his presence. I didn't see him, I just felt the presence.
I know. Come on.
Ricky is shot in the elbow,
Start shooting. And he just
but
starts shooting.
not by the intruder.
And I asked him how he got shot.
Okay. Thanks, sir.
He said, well, my father shot me. I said, how did you know your father shot you? He said, well, he turned around in my direction and was shooting towards the burglar.
An armed burglar in Bel Air. The cops think that's a little too Hollywood.
I don't know of a lot of burglars that commit residential burglaries while armed. They really don't.
After 28 years as a cop, what does make sense to Bob Grogan is a possible motive. Henry's business dealings, his womanizing, his violence. He tells the press at least 10,000 people would want to kill Henry Kyle.
It didn't take Detective Grogan longed to figure out that Henry Kyle had a lot of enemies.
I just had the feeling that what everybody was telling me was not the truth.
In the summer of 1983, millionaire Hollywood producer Henry Kyle is shot down. The 60-year-old former Marine dies in a gunfight in his Bel Air mansion on Sunset Boulevard.
And all of a sudden, he's just like, bang, bang, bang. He starts shooting like
His son, Ricky, is the only eyewitness. He claims an intruder shot his father and fled. But who wants Henry dead?
Lots of people that were enemies of Henry Kyle as a result of his personal dealings and his business dealings.
If they can't do as they're told, I'll find someone new. I want them to do it now or they're fired.
And it's not just business people who taste Henry's anger. Henry's son, Ricky, sees little of his father until he moves into his new Bel Air mansion, not long before Henry's death.
He had a temper, definitely. He had periods of, where he exhibited that temper.
Henry Kyle liked to hit people.
Here's my sissy son.
He liked to hit men. He liked to hit women. And he liked to hit children.
What do you want?
I need to borrow some money.
Money? You're always asking for money.
Ricky's relationship with his father was a roller coaster ride.
You know, he told me he loved his father, but he feared him. And it really, I would say it fluctuated day to day, depending on what happened the night before.
Innie Chen was a junior architect, refurbishing the Kyle mansion at the time.
One day I came in and he told me his father had beaten him up the night before. I don't recall over what. But still, I sort of saw this young boy hunger for the father's attention, for his favors, for some love. I think he didn't grow up with any of that. And life was quite tough from what he told me.
That's all you deserve. Drown!
I think he was trying so hard to want to prove himself, but I don't think the father was seeing that.
His son, Ricky, tells police that he loves his daddy. He's just moved in with Henry and is devastated by the murder. He's the only witness. But detectives soon learned that Ricky Kyle tells a great many lies.
Ricky has recently written to his father with good news. He says he's been accepted at prestigious Stanford University.
And his father was elated. Matter of fact, he bragged about this, and he showed this to a lot of the people that he knew in the movie business and in Texas, how proud he was of his son going to Stanford.
But the truth is a little different. There is no Stanford offer, and rather than studying, Ricky is dealing drugs.
Ricky was into drugs. That was absolutely established during the course of the case.
You've got a kid who's out there doing cocaine, selling cocaine, dealing dope. He's not thinking rationally.
Henry eventually discovers the truth and might have been planning to cut Ricky out of his inheritance.
There were some documents there, and one was a will, obviously, that Mr. Kyle had drawn up. And I noted in the beneficiary part of that will that there was a pencil drawn through the name Ricky Kyle, Jr.
If he's chopped out of his daddy's will, Ricky stands to lose millions. So he's an obvious suspect. The police have no solid evidence against him, but some would be happy to see Ricky Kyle take the fall.
Henry's live-in tennis coach has a theory. He claims Henry agreed to give him $72,000 to go to law school. He also swears Henry was planning to remove Ricky from the will. Could Ricky's intruder story be a cover-up for an angry son who might be cut out of the family fortune.
So who is the real Ricky Kyle? Until the day of his father's funeral, nobody is really sure.
Well, you know, they went back and had a large funeral for Mr. Kyle. Ricky had been out of the hospital for a week or so.
Ricky Kyle's half-sister meets up with him after the service. She later admits they shared alcohol and cocaine. And at the end of a very emotional day, Ricky tells her a shocking secret.
Ricky said, "I shot and killed Dad."
On purpose? Are you crazy?
The day of their father's funeral in Dallas, Texas, 20-year-old Ricky Kyle and his half-sister mark the occasion with a little party.
They were cocaine users together. So I guess birds of a feather that flock together, you know, kind of trust each other.
But would that trust come back to haunt Ricky? 4 days earlier in Los Angeles, their multimillionaire father, Hollywood producer Henry Kyle, was shot dead. A single bullet through the heart. Ricky is the only witness. He's told police an intruder is the shooter. Now, Ricky has a different story to tell.
I shot him in the back. And he shot me in the freaking elbow.
You shot him in the back?
Yeah, I shot him in the back.
You meant to kill him?
Yeah, he deserved it.
Ricky said, "I shot and killed Dad."
On purpose?
Yeah, on purpose. He deserved it.
He told his half-sister that he had in fact shot his father and that he had thrown the gun in the neighbor's yard.
It's the last thing his half-sister thought she'd hear on the day she buries her father.
But what he says next gives her just about the biggest shock she's ever had. He asks her to fly back to Bel Air, climb the next-door neighbor's fence, and pick up the gun he used to kill their father.
So he draws a map for her and gives it to her and says, "Hey, go back to LA and retrieve that gun because my fingerprints might be still on that and the police will find it."
But his half-sister doesn't do it. Instead, she hands the map over to her attorney. What neither of them know is the second gun has already been found by a good old-fashioned police sweep.
It was a few days after the shooting that the police locate a second weapon in the neighbor's yard.
Police now know whose gun it is. It belongs to the dead mogul's son. Ricky Kyle is arrested and charged with his father's murder.
And he then returned to Los Angeles, and we proceeded with the trial.
The prosecution would have liked to portray Ricky as a cold-blooded, heartless young man who was capable of planning and plotting to kill his father. We, on the other hand, didn't believe that and still don't.
Although Ricky told his half-sister he shot his father, at the trial, he says it was an accident, a fatal mix-up when he and his father confronted an intruder.
So we believe, and I believe today the most logical theory of what actually occurred was that Henry heard a prowler leaving. He turned and fired. That shot was right in the face of Ricky Kyle.
Ricky's lawyers argue that he and his father had a long history of violence. Ricky had every right to construe the shot as an attempt on his life. So he shoots back.
Now you need to understand Henry Kyle and the relationship he had with Ricky Kyle.
What do you want? I need to borrow some money.
And how violent he was, and how abusive he was, and how scary he was. Was it reasonable for Ricky Kyle to have presumed his life was in danger and therefore justified to fire back at his father? And he did that. and it was a fatal shot that went through his heart.
The prosecution makes a different argument.
There was never no burglar in the house. It doesn't support any theory at all. It all points towards Ricky Kyle. This guy shot and killed his father. Whether his father was abusing him or not, it doesn't justify shooting your father in the back.
For the prosecution, it's really very simple. Ricky lured his father downstairs with a lie about a burglar, then crept up behind his father and shot him in the back. For that to be true, Ricky had to fire the first shot.
But ballistics tests put a hole in the prosecution's case. They show that the first shot doesn't come from Ricky's gun. His father fired first. Then Henry Kyle fired 5 more times before he collapses.
The initial shot is high because Henry Kyle would have had to have had his arms straight up. After Henry was shot, the other 5 shots are all down low. So from there, you have to be able to logically distinguish that something was different about that first shot. And what was different was Henry hadn't already been shot through the heart.
The defense contends Henry shoots at the intruder. Ricky fires back, then runs away.
The evidence supports the belief that Ricky was running out of that room as fast as he could. Henry was slumping after having been shot and was truly on the way down, but he kept firing. And one of Henry's shots hits Ricky in the left elbow.
The jury is deadlocked, and the judge declares a mistrial. But a second trial a year later returns a conviction for the lesser crime of involuntary manslaughter. On January 9th, 1987, Ricky Kyle is sentenced to 5 years in the California State Penitentiary. He serves 2 years and is released on parole.
I believe that a lot of circumstances came together at that one critical moment that caused Henry Kyle to fire that weapon. And I believe, though it was extremely reasonable for Ricky to have concluded that his life was in danger and he was justified in pulling the trigger.
Whether Henry Kyle was a good man or a bad man, or whether he was physically abusive to his kids or not physically abusive to his kid, he didn't deserve to be shot in the back in his own house by his son.
The mansion walls of Los Angeles trumpeted wealth, but the families within were corrupted by their fortunes. Stuart and Neil Woodman learned at their father's feet, then turned it all against him. Ricky Kyle grew up with violence and responded in kind. For these Beverly Hills kids, there was no glamour in Hollywood, only lives of misery. Till next we meet, behind mansion walls, I'm Christopher Mason.